Hello, this is Kat Schleppe, and today I'm going to be presenting social work and working with survivors of sexual violence. Here in my About section, it's mainly for when I present in class, but I'll still read it here for this online version. Please note that the topics being discussed may be distressing, triggering, or upsetting for some people. If needed, you're more than welcome to take breaks in between the presentation or sit this one out. Your mental health and well-being matters. Throughout this presentation, I will be exhibiting my research on the topic of becoming a social worker in assisting survivors of sexual violence, what approaches these social workers may use to support their clients, and what an agency that works within this branch actually does. Lei-Cheng Young is the author of an article that I read titled Understanding the Help-Seeking Decisions of Sexual Assault Survivors, Implications for Social Work Practice in Hong Kong, which Lung offers a very broad understanding of how survivors' lives look like post-incident and how social workers can approach in assisting them. And post-incident survivors tend to not seek out help for a lot of reasons, those being fear of retaliation, receiving backlash, self-blame, not wanting to relive a psychologically distressing experience, and second-guessing if their experience with sexual assault, violence, rape, just from the knowledge on the subject. Some approaches that Lung notes is using social, constructionist, and feminist approaches that take a critical stance and challenge the myths of rape and sexual assault that are constructed by social, cultural, and economic life. This approach typically uses postmodern feminism as an aid against the patriarchal base of knowledge, shifting the search from truth and reality to finding the power a woman holds. Although this approach is rooted in feminism, it does not deny the experience of male victims. Instead, it's meant to take down the toxic narrative that men are meant to be all-powerful and in charge, helping women survivors stand up and have their voices heard, and men survivors be taken seriously, not seen as weak in these situations. So, going on to my interview, I'd like to talk about who I interviewed, which is Jorge Barraza, the operations director at UCASA, who also works at the Rape Recovery Center, and I'll be talking about that center and its resources in a little bit. If you know, he gave a presentation in our class a few weeks ago, so it was cool interviewing him. So here's my Q&A page, which depicts all the questions I asked him specifically and just a very kind of concise, summarized version of his answers. Sorry, I have something in my throat. How do you practice self-care as a social worker? What helps you cope with this tough session with a client? And he answered, working at the Rape Recovery Center, people don't see you as a statistic or numbers on a spreadsheet. Workers tend to be very selfless, so check in on your coworkers, create a tight-knit environment, and be conscious of your workload as well. Find your limit and go lower. Don't become indispensable. And I personally, what I took from that, was that the community of people who work at the Rape Recovery Center or just clinics in general that assist this type of community, they are, it's very easy to look out for the people around you. As he mentioned, they're very selfless. So something that he specifically mentioned to me is that when you start to get to know your coworkers, you can see, you know, what environment they or what community, sorry, they typically serve, and maybe it has some kind of personal connection to them, or they just really care about their clients and the people that they continuously help out on a daily. And, you know, if they go through a tough session or have had just like a really bad day, it's really important to also check up on them and be like, hey, you know, I know today was hard for you, but let's go out on a walk, or tell me about something you care about. I know he mentioned talking to his coworker about his cats. I truly think that it's very beautiful that social workers are just very naturally caring and very selfless and just constantly looking out for the people around them. So be a good social worker and look out for your coworkers too. What made you want to seek out this profession? Was there something that inspired you to go into this line of work? personal background, being Chicano, having immigrant parents, which for those of you who don't know what a Chicano is a Mexican American. Typically, if the person who identifies as Chicano has immigrant parents, like me personally, I am Chicano, especially growing up in the LA area in California. There's a lot of Chicano culture around there. So, and Jorge also grew up in central LA. So that's basically the central definition of what being Chicano is. He has immigrant parents, being a teen parent, having family that are social workers. It kind of gave him that eventual thought of, who's going to speak up for them. Seeing people, I know he mentioned this in the presentation he gave in our class, and also mentioned this to me when I was interviewing him. Whenever he would pass by the fields and seeing usually immigrant Latinos at work, it gave him such a sense of worry, and just wanting to immediately stand up for those kinds of people is what inspired him to get into social work. And I feel such a deep connection with that, also having my own parents be immigrants and having them work in the fields. It is one of the truly biggest reasons why I also got into social work. So that was really cool to hear that from another person who works in the system but still stands up against it. And it's a constant reminder that you need to be radical, or the current term woke. You need to be not, what's the word? You need to not be right leaning. Conservative is what I was thinking of. You need to be, someone who wants to stand up for what's right, because social work is political. And if you don't think so, then it's not the right job for you. Because if you are not into politics and you are not well versed in what's going on in your community, not only the people around you, but legally, what kind of bills are being passed, same thing with laws, what kind of things are just going on around you, then how can you be a social worker? Which is something we talked about a lot. And another question being, how do you separate your feelings from a client's personal situation? And he mentioned to get into the advocate role. Remind yourself that you're a professional and that there's stuff within your scope, which is something I personally think I would struggle with, is reminding myself, this is just my job. I cannot get too invested in this, because then, it's going to distract you from other clients you have or other things you have to work on. And you have to remind yourself, I have to give all of the things that I can personally give. And that's the one thing you can do, give clear objectives to the task at hand. And it's a lot of pros and cons when it comes to sexual violence advocacy, just in general, because they're, it's a tough subject. Another thing I asked, sorry, was what's your branch of work? What communities do you specifically serve? And he mentioned serving other professionals, which was very interesting and cool to learn, that he's basically like a therapist's therapist, which I found fascinating because it kind of tied into the next question I asked. He does a lot of youth programs, which involves consent workshops, community events, and is the director of the Rape Recovery Center, which was also pretty cool and interesting just because I got to research that clinic. And how important do you think it is to have your own therapist as a social worker? He mentioned that it's very important. It doesn't have to be super frequent, like multiple times a week or once a week or anything, but it's good at least once a year for a tune-up, which I thought was a funny term to describe it, so I put it in here. As for mentioned, doesn't have to be super frequent, but having an outside perspective is always important, especially when you are actively in the work of helping other people's lives. What you see as right may not be what is right for the client or may be right in that specific situation, that time frame, so having other people put their perspective onto it, or even have a perspective on your feelings of the situation or of a client, things like that. It's always so important to have someone else tell you, to kind of be the, what's it called, outside looking in, the like kind of bystander in a way. He saw that as important, and I think that's a pretty big deal as well. So now onto the fun part, we're going to be discussing the agency that I did research on, specifically which my interviewee works at, the Rape Recovery Center in Salt Lake City here in Utah. Local. So the offered help that they provide on their website, just by opening up raperecoverycenter.org, you're greeted with tons of useful information, sections specifically being dedicated to survivors, friends and family, volunteers, donors, and education and prevention, along with links to a hotline, their social medias, and how to schedule an appointment, along with other forms of contact. Not only do they offer help through their website and clinic, but even schedule events to raise awareness, like Denim Day on April 21st, College Community Career Nights, also known as Triple C Nights, at Granite Peaks on April 23rd, and West Valley Pride on June 13th. All events provide guests with information on the clinic's journey and resources. At most of these things, they usually have a little booth. You can stop by, talk to them. They usually have volunteers or people who work at the clinic/recovery center that can give you little pamphlets, information, business cards, all that good stuff on what the clinic does. And if you are a survivor or maybe a family friend of one, or just interested in volunteering for the clinic, just helping out the cause, they can give you tons of information and resources, which is super cool. And the information I listed in the boxes just above this third one can all be found on the front page of their website. Literally just opening it up, that was a tongue twister, just opening it up, pretty much everything is just on that front page. You can scroll down just maybe one or two paragraphs and everything is there. And personally, I think it's super crucial for having all the important big details and information on the front page just so it can get out to the public quicker. As someone who studied web design for a bit, you got to give the people what they want. So I have the website listed right there at www.raperecoverycenter.org. Check it out if you can. Once again, there's super great information on there. So my last side being, what can you do? Not your branch of work, but still want to help survivors or those around you. Keeping up to date with resources, centers, hotlines, and bills, laws, acts that are crucial for social workers to know. Keeping a list or mental note of these resources could very much come in handy. So I have some resources listed here on the side if you want to take a screenshot, a picture, whatever it is. All super good and important, I personally would say, for social workers to know, especially if you're going to be working or already are working in this branch specifically. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry for stuttering, there you go, a million times. This was my best take. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. Bye.